Hey, what's up everyone? In this video I want to cover the 120mm RGB fans on the market for the $30 to $35 price range. So I've got upHere fans, I've got the RGB123 and the C8123. And in addition to that, I've got some PWM fans to compare them to, including the Deepcool RF120M and the Arctic F12 and P12 fans. To kick things off, I want to talk about PWM, which is your motherboard's way of telling all the fans in your system how fast to spin. And this speed can be adjusted automatically based on what kind of tasks you're doing on your computer. So if you're doing some light browsing, your motherboard is probably telling your fans not to spin very fast, maybe even at their slowest speed. And on the other hand, if you're doing video games or rendering a video, then your motherboard is probably telling the fans to speed up their max RPM so that they can dissipate heat away from your components that are heating up because they're under so much workload. So on this side of the table, I've got the upHere fans, which are not PWM controlled, which means that when they're on, they run at 1200 RPM and they are locked in at that speed permanently. There is no way to adjust that speed. On the other hand, the Deepcool RF120M and the Arctic fans are all PWM controlled, which means that when you first turn your computer on and when you're doing some light browsing, your fans will be running at the lowest speed possible and won't be generating that much noise. One of the other advantages of PWM fans is that they have a range of RPM. So, for example, the Deepcool RF120M fans have a range of 500 to 1500 RPMs. So when you're doing some light browsing, it's probably down at 500 RPM, and when you're doing something like a heavier workload, then it's going to be bumping up to 1500 RPM. And on the other hand, when you look at the upHere RGB fans, they are locked in at 1200 RPM, and they are going to continuously make a fair amount of noise because 1200 RPM is pretty fast for a fan. So I want to jump into some of the pros and cons of each of these fans, and I'll start with the upHere RGB fans. So I will start with the RGB123. So I've got the RGB123 fans opened up here, and as you can see, these LED rings go all the way around the outside of the fan on the front and on the back, which is nice. And they've got a proprietary connector that connects into a fan hub that comes in the box. And one of the things I want to note is that it comes with these rubber pads that you have to pull off and then stick onto all 8 spots on the fans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this will help reduce the vibrations when it's put into your PC. But this is really tedious and takes about a half hour, so it's just something to note. I personally found it was fine to just watch a TV show and put these on. It wasn't a big deal to me. One last thing to note is that these are currently on Amazon for $35, and again, these are not PWM fans, so they will run at 1200 RPM all the time. Moving on to the upHere C8123-5 fans. I'll get these opened up. Alright, so I've got the upHere C8123 fan opened up, and as you can see, the LEDs are on the fan itself, and you can see the LEDs through the front and through the back. And again, it's got a proprietary connector that goes into a fan hub that comes in the box. And again, it comes with these pads. Now in this case, the C8 SKU comes with foam pads. And I think the rubber are probably higher quality, but I guess in the end it really doesn't matter that much. These were a little harder to put on, but overall still not something to really worry about. One last note, the upHere C8123 fans for a 5-pack are $30 on Amazon. Before moving on from the upHere fans, I do want to note that they are controlled with a small little remote that has different colored buttons on them, and that's how you can change the colors. Personally, I just use it on the auto setting, and I think that it goes through all the cycles of colors and modifications and little effects, and I like that. That's good for me. Next up, I've got the Deepcool RF120M fans, which are PWM controlled, and these are interesting because they come with two sets of wires each, and the first wire can be used to daisy chain the RGB effect to each other, and the final wire goes into the 12-volt 4-pin header on the motherboard to control the RGB effects. And then the other wire is for the PWM controls. And one thing I want to really stress is that these PWM wires are extremely short. And all the other reviews that I watched kind of stress this, and I totally underestimated it because they were way shorter than I expected. What I ended up having to do was flip all the fans over, and they're actually running upside down in the orientation that I have them in the case that I built them in. And this was simply so that the orientation of the fan would be better suited to run the wires on the back side of the case and connect them all to the two included fan hubs from Deepcool. After some finagling and stretching all the wires and making sure that they just reach to get into the fan hubs that were included, I realized then that I only had two fan headers on the motherboard that I was using. So my CPU fan is actually plugged into one of the fan hubs that was included by Deepcool, and the fan hub itself is plugged into the CPU fan. So if you have a motherboard that only has one fan header for the CPU and one fan header for all the other fans, then you may have a rough time with these particular RF120 fans. And I guess that's one advantage that the upHere fans have, is that they all have these proprietary connectors that go into one fan hub that's powered by either Molex or SATA, and that's how they get their power. On the other hand, the upHere fans are not PWM controlled. Finally, I want to touch on the Arctic F12 and P12 fans, which at just around $26 to $28, depending on which SKU you get, I think that these are probably the best thing to compare other 5-pack fans to, because these are really, like, in my opinion, kind of like budget Noctua fans, which are considered the best fans on the market. But these also look a lot better, in my opinion. And although they don't have RGB, I will say that if you don't care about RGB, these are a really, really good alternative. However, if you do care about RGB, I will say that I will recommend the Deepcool RF120M fans, because with the PWM technology, they do run a lot slower RPM and are a lot quieter because of this, because most of the time you're not doing anything that's very stressful on your computer, like rendering a video, maybe gaming, but even if you're gaming, you're maybe only doing that 50% of the time that your computer's on, so it's nice to have fans with PWM. Finally, when it comes to looks, I really do like the upHere RGB123 outer ring, and I think that just looks really, really clean. As a final roundup, personally, I would say that the C8123 fan from upHere is probably out in my book, because it has a very similar lighting effect to the Deepcool RF120M fans, and the Deepcool RF120M fans have PWM, which I think is really important. That being said, if you're all about looks, I really think that the RGB123 fans from upHere look really clean. And I just want to touch on this last point really quickly. The Arctic P12 fans are a new SKU from Arctic, and overall they're quieter, they're more power efficient, and the P actually stands for pressure optimized. So when you've got them up against a panel and you're pushing the air through, say, a metal mesh panel, these are supposed to work better than really anything else on the market. So overall, for usually around $28, I think this is a really good pick if you're not into RGB. that wraps up my summary of some of the RGB fans on the market currently for the $30 to $35 price range. And I really do think if you went with the Deepcool RF120M fans, this is probably your best bet. But if you're really purely about looks, these upHere RGB123 fans, I think they look really clean, but that's totally your choice. So thank you so much for watching, and thanks for spending your time with me. And if you want to see more tech videos from me, my name's Eddy, and please subscribe. Thanks.